We can get going. All right, so we're lecture 23, Energy, Life. No more questions about the dams next time. We don't have any time. Lecture 22 was canceled because I was away at that conference, so there isn't enough time. So we will conclude this week. I will not dribble over, as many professors do, into next week. So be grateful for that. So lecture 23, Energy, Lifelines. And I got a lot of slides, so here we go. Keys for today. Energy runs the modern economy, as if you didn't already know. There's very dramatic geographies of supply and demand and the expanding global frontier of energy, which are interesting. Energy supply is also a matter of state. It isn't just a matter of the free market, but it is a very profitable and very powerful industry. It isn't just oil companies, by the way. Electricity, we'll have a section on electricity, which is very much on the rise, and that gives me a chance to talk about a couple things like the grid and deregulation, and then just at the end a bit about green energy or alternative energy and conservation. We will talk more about damage and weight, pollution and waste next time. Okay, so I've got 4 parts today: chain of fuels, the Great Game, Electric Avenue, and greener pastures. The first 2 are our main ones today. So, chain of fuels, talk about the fossil fuel economy, the geography of demand, the fuel frontier, and energy suppliers. Okay, so it's pretty clear the relationship between industrial revolutions and fossil fuel consumption. That once you get an industrial revolution, you switch from organic forms of fuel, or I should say living forms of fuel like wood and straw and other things like that, to inanimate and fossil fuels. Water was actually the leading edge of power in the industrial revolution, but very quickly turning to coal for heating and powering. And this is a nice chart in graph in England. Coal is the brown. And you can see that coal just took off, while things like firewood and draft animals and all declined over time, and human power kind of diminished a bit too. So, and then here's U.S. consumption of coal in the 19th century, well, actually 20th century too, but you can see with the Industrial Revolution it exploded. But notice that it is fairly late in the day. It's not in the very early period. Of course, these graphs are tend to make the beginnings look like nothing, but you can see a little leap up there, tiny, but it really takes off. So most of your coal consumption's after 1850. Before that, it's still wood and water. And here's China, energy consumption taking off with its industrial revolution of our time. Now, obviously, it was rising even before that, but here's the reforms in 78, heading up pretty dramatically, and then in the 2000s, exploding. So, and what we talked about last time is nature's free gifts. What fossil fuel is this fantastic free gift of ancient biomass formed by photosynthesis and then buried deep beneath the earth and turned into oil and coal and gas over the eons. And that's what dominates modern economies is fossil fuels, not anything else. This is I don't have a year on this, but this is a mid-2000s graph in the, I think it's just the U.S. So petroleum 40%, natural gas 22%, coal 22%. So right there you're up to 82%. Nukes 8, and renewables 7 here. That doesn't quite add up to 100, does it? Well, I didn't notice that when I yanked this off the web. And then notice amongst the renewables that biomass, current biomass is a huge part of that. Wind and solar are still tiny. So it's a classic free gift, and therefore it's been pursued very eagerly since the Industrial Revolution. We use these fuels for everything, basically, to run everything, to run our machine world. So transportation, which is by machines, industrial production by machines, and again, it's a goods economy. The biggest part of transportation is moving goods around, industrial production of goods. Agricultural production is also huge user of what most agrarianists call petrofarming today. And without petroleum, you can't have the kind of productivity we have in today's industry or agriculture or logistics or anything else. Consumer use, if you look at this graph by sector going back to 1950, consumer use is the, here, residential, commercial, of course that still includes stores and offices, but notice that it's still relatively small compared to transport, this big one, and industry. And so domestic use would be just absolutely beansy. So again, personal commitment to, that would include housing, which does use quite a lot of energy, but even so, relatively speaking, it's pretty small. It's the economy that uses the energy, not to produce things and move things around. It isn't so much you personally. How do you make fuels? Well, most fossil fuels have to be refined, so I thought I'd just throw this in here. And we tend to think of refineries as processing petroleum, but you can refine gas and coal. You can produce various substances out of coal, and this is where you get these multiple outputs of naphtha and diesel fuel and kerosene, jet fuel and gasoline and all those things. I'll throw in the catalytic cracking, which is what this represents, which is a huge improvement over the old heating and distilling, which was kind of like making whiskey, only it was bigger and much less interesting. That was invented in California in the 1930s, when California was the world's greatest producer of petroleum products. Now, geography of demand. Global fuel consumption is very tightly related to industrialization, industrial or advanced economies, as you can see from this map. Even within the U.S., it skips over the empty places. It's in cities. It's in industrial regions, northeast more than the south, or the mountain states. Here's California, looking pretty high there. Northern Europe and Britain, and so on. China, Japan, Korea. And that's probably from the mid-2000s as well. So it's mostly in the north and in the industrialized countries. Places, even Latin America, if you look on here, barely shows up. Quite amazingly, actually. I would have thought it would be more striking. And India, even with all its growth, is still a very low per capita consumer of fuel. So the excess demand is in the north. This is a nice chart because it shows barrels per day of oil. And the production versus the consumption, okay? And they more or less match, although the U.S., as you can see, consumption's the green, is an excess consumer. Used to be the world's biggest producer, but no more. And again, this chart shows you that the developed countries, the OECD, which at that time was still the OECD is how many now? It's not the G8, it's a bit more than that. It's 12 or something. Uses the vast majority of the world's energy, as you would expect. Now, obviously, you can say here, supply surpluses in the Middle East, here, Persian Gulf, and in Russia, and a few other places. The U.S. is the world's greatest fuel hog by not an order of magnitude, but by double the Europeans per capita. That's European demand growth, which has been really flat for the last 30 years. Here's world oil consumption, 2004, the U.S. using 25%. So it's the usual thing where we are the greatest resource consumer in the world. China is, of course, coming on, but we're still the biggest by far, especially per capita. We use much more than Japan. Partly that's transportation. because those are smaller places. Europe, Japan are smaller. European countries are smaller. But they also do things like have massive gasoline taxes. So everybody has tiny cars because gasoline costs about, about triple here? Double anyway. Generally double. China, of course, has come on, and there's lots of talk about China, India. And China's energy consumption now equals the U.S. because of its rapid development. But its per capita is still 1/5 the U.S. So although we go on about, China, it's China's fault that we have global warming, it isn't. And when they had the Copenhagen meetings and third world countries said, well, look, you guys have to do more because you've contributed more over the last 200 years of industrialization, they were absolutely right. Now, of course, that was also self-serving, so they wouldn't have to do anything. There was internal critiques in India and China about that self-serving argument, which helped destroy the Copenhagen Accords. But here's China catching up with the U.S. in this graph. But here's per capita. Here's the U.S. massively ahead of anything. South Korea is interesting that it's that inefficient, that it's that massive an energy user. So that's kind of interesting, and I don't know the explanation. There's Japan coming in here. Now, that seems to be a little different than the other figures I had. That makes Japan look worse. But overall, Europe is sort of in this area, and then you go down to poor countries, use much, much less. And China's way down here. Okay, the fuel frontier. Well, as I talked about last time with the resource frontier, energy, of course, follows this model pretty dramatically of moving outward. Now, coal was internal. It was British coal, U.S. coal, French coal, German coal that helped drive their industrial revolutions. And so coal, more widely distributed and easier to get at. So it was the first great fossil fuel to be used, as I already said. But it's still going strong. And it's quite amazing how coal is still, a fifth or a quarter of our energy budget. We tend to think it's old-fashioned. But what they do, of course, is keep coming up with better ways to dig it up, better ways to transport it in slurry pipelines, better ways to burn it, and so on. Of course, this is their better way, is the mountaintop cutting in Appalachia. Coal is still a major export. This is an export trade map here. China uses by far the most, actually, I think it uses more coal than the U.S. now. Not mistaken, it's soft coal, which is really polluting, which is one of the reasons air pollution in China is so horrible. And it's flowing around the world. So coal is still there, but the shift from oil took place in the United States. Above all, oil was first really discovered as a commercial product, as you might expect, in the late 19th century, as the Industrial Revolution picked up speed. It was not yet used in vehicles. It would be used early. Petroleum was used for kerosene, for burning, in lamps and so on. But it starts actually back, as you might expect, in the East Coast. Again, right under their noses in Pennsylvania, and then moving to Indiana and some other places around the Midwest. But then pretty quickly it was realized those were not very good oil fields, and it shifted west. Oklahoma and Texas first opened up around 1900. So does California, but Oklahoma and Texas kind of leap ahead of us. Then California comes on really gangbusters after about 1905. And then the 20s, the big Southern California strikes propel California to the leadership. And indeed, this is where, as I think I said once before, a whole series of innovations in deep drilling, in cement casing of wells, dealing with thick, heavy oil and injection, using injection pressure of water, steam to bring up oil, and so on, learning what to do with heavy asphaltic oil, how to refine it, and indeed inventing catalytic cracking in the 1930s, and then taking our technology, for instance, when the Saudi Arabian oil fields were opened up by Chevron, with its drilling technology in the 1940s, the big ones. There were earlier ones, but the big deep ones. East Texas comes in the 1930s. Nobody knew that was there, and it blew, and it became the biggest field in the United States. And then by World War II and after, especially with offshore drilling, Louisiana and then the Gulf. So it's even within the U.S., the frontier of oil and gas has moved around. It's still moving, by the way. We'll get back to that. In the mid-20th century, the Persian Gulf, of course, was the most dramatic. But even before that, Mexico and Venezuela had been opened up because they were closer to the United States. They were actually opened up ahead. Over in Asia, the Europeans, the Brits especially, went into Russia and down to the Middle East to start opening up oil fields in the early 20th century, which we started to become pretty big by the mid-20th century. And by the Persian Gulf hits, of course, becomes the biggest supply area in the world by far, the biggest reserve by far. But that's starting to change because of the new frontiers that are as big as Saudi Arabia. So late 20th century, probably the biggest action was going deep for oil and gas. Going on at the Gulf of Mexico is where it started to go deeper with these kind of rigs. This chart goes only up to about 10,000 feet with new, various technological changes in platforms and drilling, extraction, and so on. Actually, the first offshore wells in the world were drilled off Santa Barbara, again in California in 1940. But it soon leaves here because we don't have that great offshore oil. So it went to where there was better offshore oil. The North Sea in the 1970s was the next great deep water breakthrough, deeper than the Gulf at that time, although the Gulf was going much deeper now. African coast by the 1980s and 90s. And now Brazil has just made these huge hits, what they call the pre-salt. Well, I'm going to come back to that, but yeah, I'm going to come back to that. I don't know, I should have taken it out there. Sorry. Yeah, here's where I wanted it. Oops, a little error there. So, but now we got new frontiers. So this hasn't changed. I suppose I could throw the Arctic in as well, although nothing started there yet. But Brazil, which has had no fossil fuels to speak of, that's why they've been the leaders in sugar processing for alcohol, have discovered these very deep deposits under old salt deposits, around 20 to 30,000 feet deep. And up till now, most deep wells go maybe 10 to 20. I forgot what the Deepwater Horizon was. Anybody remember how deep that was? I think that was maybe 15 to 20. But these are even deeper, and they're just starting to open them up. So Brazil is going to be one of the leaders in extreme deep drilling. And there's huge deposits down here. They say, at least as big as the North Sea. Some people say triple the North Sea. Then there's Alberta tar sands up here, the Athabascan tar sands, which are very much in the news, with the, the Keystone Pipeline. And this is a map of the prospective pipeline. But of course, if you're going to take it out here, you're going to have to bring it to where it's going to be refined and shipped. So the pipeline is an absolute logical extension of the idiocy of the tar sands, which cost about as many BTUs to get the oil out as the oil burns for. It's extremely sludgy, thick, difficult stuff. It's almost like gas extraction from coal. It's slightly better. So you're not getting very many BTUs net for an extraordinary amount of carbon. And of course, there's a lot of chit-chat in Canada about, oh, no problem. In case you think the Canadians are more progressive than we are, yes, again, when it comes to natural resources, forget it. And here, and then, of course, fracking, this has just exploded. You're living in this revolution now, these revolutions, really. And fracking, which is extracting gas from shale using high-pressure steam and water. I guess it's steam. No, they have to have hot water? I'm not sure. No? Can be cold water? Okay. All right. But it's high pressure water to get it out of this shale. And it turns out the amount of gas in North America that could be fracked is probably as big as Saudi Arabian oil. The amount of oil in the Athabascan tar sands is definitely as big as Saudi Arabian oil. There's a lot of oil in this world. There's a lot of fossil fuel. This is just a graph of where fossil fuel comes from today, but you can see it's wiggled around over time, and it could change again. Oh, this oil, excuse me, this is just oil. Like you can see Russia kind of shrinking here, but in terms of gas, Russia's expanding. So, I couldn't find one that did this job, but it's kind of nice in terms of mapping the different areas. Here's South America slightly growing, Middle East actually growing, surprisingly enough, and so on. So take it all with a grain of salt because that's just production. And then energy suppliers. A very important part of energy supply is oil and gas pipelines. Distribution here is, again, very, very important, even more important than in many, many other industries. You've got to move this stuff around. You've got to get it to where it's going to be refined and ultimately where it's going to be burned and used. Massive gas pipelines coming from Russia and the Middle East to supply Europe, which has very poor supplies of any. It doesn't have petroleum or gas in large quantity at all. It does have coal, but that's sort of out these days. This is movement of our natural gas pipelines in the U.S., kind of tremendous systems. We tend to think of, I'll come back to the electric grid, but these gas line grids are huge. They, by the way, you'll notice how many pass through Oklahoma here, which is kind of the national center of the movement. That's why they want to bring the Keystone Pipeline down here. That's why there are two prices quoted on the world market. One is a London price, and the other is an Oklahoma, well, they call it Texas price, but it's really the Oklahoma price, because there's so much oil stored here at this juncture. And a lot of this you never see. You'll often see these pipelines just when they come up, and there's a little control knob, well, it's not a knob, it's a big wheel, but, it'll be about this big, but you will never see the pipeline on the ground until it blows up. Which, happily, they don't do that often. Also, tankers and trains play a huge role in this. Also, other kinds of barges to carry coal. And the world shipping of oil and gas, and also the gas tankers, although they're rarer. And these, again, central, huge amounts of investment. These ships just get bigger and bigger. The technology continues to improve. There are even coal pipelines that run from Wyoming all the way into the Middle West. They grind it up and then slurry it with water as a kind of sludge. And they can pump it, kind of loose sludge. It's no different than sewage. And they can move it in very long distances very efficiently that way. And refining is, of course, a key part of the supply lines. I'm not going to talk too much about refining today, but it has been often very crucial to the geography and economics of energy. Rockefeller's empire that he built in the late 19th, early 20th century was really through the control not of oil and its production, but through controlling distribution. He controlled the trains and the pipelines and the refineries. And that's when he built his empire, which was then broken up in 1911. But to understand how big it was, think of all the companies that are heirs to that, to Standard Oil, Chevron, Exxon, now ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil were both. Amoco was Standard of Indiana, I think. So Ohio was Standard of Ohio. So these were all over the U.S. and by far the biggest oil companies until recently. And also the control of refining is really important for supplier nations to try and get out of that trap of just being natural resource producers, like El Salvador and coffee and bananas. Because oil can be very much like bananas if you don't control it. Energy corporations are obviously some of the biggest corporations in the world. You all know that. They make tremendous profits and huge capital investments in refining tankers and so on. They, however, have been, as I'll say later, eased out of most production today. They control less and less production, which is why they're often they're out on the vanguard of production. They're really important, and countries like Brazil and Mexico often have to have contracts with these companies to come in to develop the most advanced wells and the most advanced pipelines and so on, because they've got the technology. They're the guys doing a lot of the most exotic drilling and pumping and refining and screwing up the world, but we'll do more of that next time. Okay, the next topic is the Great Game, which is this old British phrase for the imperial struggles with Russia and the Ottoman Empire down in the Middle East in the 19th century. But it evokes imperialism and the state. So I'll talk about prices and peaks, and I'll talk about politics and power, and then a little bit about petroleum, this problem of the resource curse. So price setting is done in two ways. There are contracts and there are spot markets. I guess I should add to that, there are, of course, futures and derivative markets, futures and options and puts and takes and all that stuff that I don't understand. But I just throw those kind of under. I shouldn't throw them under spot markets because they're really future markets. And the global markets are mostly run out of London Exchange, Petroleum Exchange, and the New York Minerals Exchange. That's where oil prices are mostly being set by traders, massive investor traders, companies who are buying and selling through these exchanges. So it's kind of like stock markets. And they're quite centralized, they have quite clear geography, and everything kind of passes through these centers in the form, of course, of pieces of paper, of representations of the real stuff. The oil barrels may be sitting in Oklahoma, or may be sitting in a tanker offshore Britain, or maybe sitting in storage tanks in Saudi Arabia. And prices, of course, are normally, normal markets do a great job of adjusting prices in short term, but they do a rather much less good job with longer term prices. It's very hard to tell where prices are going to go. It's very hard to predict kind of irrationalities of panics. It's very hard to predict bottlenecks that will suddenly shoot up prices or gluts that will drop prices. And so, we have futures and options and all those things were invented in food commodities like wheat in order to try and stabilize the misfunctioning of the everyday market. Another way of trying to do that is through contract. I'll just get a contract that you're going to supply me from oil. Petrobras is going to supply me oil for the next 3 years at a given price. And that's our deal, and everybody then can plan. And there's a lot of that long-term purchasing. So that most oil is actually purchased through